the next hour. A reminder that I am paid good money to make, and that is that we are being streamed live to people out there, and it's also being recorded. So please bear that in mind when we engage in our conversations together. You'll see on the pass out here that the intent, as for those of you who have been party to previous times when I've done some readings such as today, that I will do a reading, and then very graciously Moira Poppen Gargano and Peter Christensen have kindly agreed to be responders to my reading. That will come after I've read through this particular piece, which is a chapter from a recently published memoir from last year. And then my hope and intent is that the conversation unfolds all around the circle, hence the circle rather than the auditorium style that we're accustomed to. Moira will not sit here, and Peter's over there, so we're not a panel. So when we engage in conversation, if you have something to say to Peter, say it to Peter. If you have something to say to me, great. But we're not up here all responding at the same time. And hopefully we will engage in responding one to another around the circle rather than purely to one, two, or three of us. But welcome. Let's open with a word of prayer, please. Gracious God, thank you for this time together as your family. Be with those who are out and about with the weather conditions. Grant safety to each and all. Guide our reflections and help us to know your presence and to reflect the grace of your presence in the way in which we engage each other and allow ourselves to be touched by you. We pray this in your name. Amen. The focus for today is the fourth commandment, but I want to make a comment. It's going to be a reading that might seem to be specifically about the fourth commandment, but my hope is that we will actually engage in some conversation that takes us beyond just the scope of the commandment and beyond just the explicit stuff that is in this chapter into some things that are more implicit. And I'm not going to explain what I'm meaning by that, but as the hour unfolds, I think there'll be opportunity for us to give consideration to things beyond what may seem to be the most obvious, concrete dynamics in this particular story. I'm going to start by reading from Exodus chapter 20. These verses that comprise the entirety in that book of what we know of as the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. And the reading you'll see is entitled, God Rest Ye. Welcome. The intent is that there's an entry point there. Okay. God rest ye. The look on their faces was one of both confusion and relief. Dana and Connor nodded tentatively at me. I continued. I'm serious. What you're doing on Sunday mornings is both commendable and biblical. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn. The three of us were sitting around the kitchen table, with their 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 9, playing quietly in the nearby living room. I had arrived some 20 minutes earlier, having scheduled this home visit the previous week. I had phoned their home and spoken with Dana, indicating my pastoral concern for their family's well-being. I hadn't seen any of the 5 of them in worship for the better part of 3 or 4 months, and expressed to her that I would enjoy a chance to catch up in person, were their busy schedule to allow for it. Dana had graciously invited me to come by at 7 that next Tuesday evening, when they'd all be at home. When I arrived a few minutes past 7, Connor met me at the door of their small home. He ushered me into the living room, where I was greeted by the 3 kids. The 2 younger ones were already in their pajamas, their hair still wet from their bath time. Dana came down the stairs, having just overseen the twosomes' evening wash-up routine. For a few minutes, I had some back-and-forth chatter with all 3 children, hearing about school, soccer, dance, and such. When it was clear the kids wanted to be about their own games, the 3 of us adults retreated to the kitchen to catch up. Once seated around the kitchen table, I invited the 2 parents to fill me in on how they were all faring. I indicated I had missed seeing them for some time and was concerned that all was well with the family. It was Connor who spoke first. "Well, Pastor Bob, we appreciate your taking the time to come by." When I nodded, he continued. "We feel kind of badly that we haven't been back to church in so long. It's not that we have any problems with Sunday school or worship, but, well, it's been really busy in our family life." He looked over at his wife. Dana picked up where Connor left off. Referencing her own part-time work as a clerk in a local realty office, she explained, "Our jobs have gotten more and more demanding, Pastor Bob." With regard to her husband's employment in sales for a local pharmaceutical company, she said, "Connor's now been ordered to be on the road a lot more than the last few years." I looked at Connor, who continued to look at his wife. She began to tear up. They've expanded his territory to Burlington up north, Syracuse out west, Springfield in the east, and Newburgh down south. It's a huge territory. And even if Connor's able to drive to and from one or another distribution site in one day, he's typically not home before the kids' bedtime. Sometimes he doesn't make it home until the next night. I looked over at Connor, who was now tearing up like his beloved wife. "Wow, Connor, that sounds like a huge time demand," I said quietly. He nodded, saying nothing. Looking first at one and then at the other, I added, "That has to be taking it out of both of you." "You have no idea, Pastor Bob," responded Connor quietly. Sensing he had more to say, I waited. And then, "I'm around here so little from Monday through, well, Saturday, that I've been missing my family like crazy." Then looking at his wife, he added, "It's doubly hard on Dana, since she now has to do just about everything for the family on top of her work at the agency. I used to be able to do my share of things around here, including with the kids, but that's taken a hit. In fact," he added, "this evening is the only one I'll likely be home to help put the guys to bed this week." With that, I confess I felt a wave of embarrassment encroaching on their limited time together as a family. "I'm sorry to take your time this evening, guys. My apologies." But before I was able to indicate my readiness to stand and make my exit, they both shook their heads as one. "No, please don't go, Pastor Bob," said Dana. "It's really good to see you." Connor nodded in evident agreement. "We've missed everyone at the church, including you, and we're glad you haven't forgotten about us." "You've definitely not been forgotten," I responded. Then, before I was able to say a word more, Connor looked at Dana, then at me, and spoke. What you should probably know, Pastor Bob, is that Dana and I decided a few months ago that Sunday mornings would be family time. Every Sunday we get up, make pancakes all together, and then play board games or read stories aloud, all 5 of us together in the living room. Glancing at Dana, he stopped. I waited. Dana picked up the thread, saying, Sunday mornings are now dear to us. Most Sunday afternoons, it's off to soccer games or dance recitals, but we protect the mornings for us as a whole family. Looking down and then back up at me, she added, so that's why we've not been in church on Sundays. And then quietly, we're sorry. At which point I too teared up. I said, no apologies are necessary, none. To the contrary, I applaud you. What the 2 of you, the 5 of you, have decided to do is commendable beyond measure. Are you serious? Whispered Connor. The look on both of their faces was one of both confusion and relief. Dana and Connor looked somewhat tentatively at me. I'm very serious. What you're doing on Sunday mornings is both commendable and biblical. That's when I told them about a sermon I had preached 10 years earlier, well before they had started to attend our congregation's Sunday morning services. I explained I had spent the better part of 3 months preaching a series of sermons about the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. I noted I had read a remarkable book about those 10 dictates given to the people of Israel at Mount Sinai, and what each of the 10 was likely to have been understood to mean by those recently liberated slaves from Egypt, well more than 3 millennia ago. I said, the 4th commandment is about the Sabbath, what we today call Sunday. It's the commandment we typically think tells us we should go to church. Dana and Connor nodded, acknowledging that to be their understanding as well. I then went on, well, what I shared from the pulpit on the Sunday when we considered the 4th commandment is that that understanding misses the point. In fact, it may be wrong. The look on their faces was now one of uncertainty, if not disagreement. So I proceeded to explain the following, saying, according to many Old Testament scholars, when God instructed the Israelites to, quote, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, unquote, God was not commanding them to go to a gathering place in order to share in corporate worship. Rather, God was instructing them to rest, simply to rest with their families, at home. While Dana and Connor listened with expressions of growing curiosity, I then described how the 4th commandment was God's gift to the previously enslaved Israelites to take at least 1 day each week to be together, spouses reunited, and parents with children. Why? Because while in bondage, those same Israelites had been afforded no time to rest, much less be together as families. God abhorred such dehumanizing of the enslaved, now saying, I allow, no, I insist, you spend 1 day each week together, not working in the field or in the market. Rest 1 day at home, together as a family. I then shared the following with no small measure of embarrassment as a member of the clergy, saying, but within just 1 or 2 generations' time after the 10 commandments had been given to the people of Israel, something grossly wrong happened. The Levites, who were the priests among the people, decided it could be to their own benefit to twist the intended meaning of the 4th commandment. Rather than simply being a gift, an instruction for families to be reunited in rest together at home at least once each week, the priests began to teach the people something entirely different. They began to teach everyone that the fourth commandment was God's order to head each and every one to a high, holy place of worship. There, the priest said, men should worship with men, placing tithes into the offering plates and conveniently into the pockets of the priests. The women, meanwhile, were segregated with each other and their children away from husbands and fathers. The round-trip treks to and from those high holy places oftentimes took all day, meaning the families simply had no time to be together at home at rest. To the contrary, they were wearied by long hikes from home to and from those high holy places, where men were separated from the rest. The end result? The intended gift of the fourth commandment was eviscerated of any blessing. In fact, the commandment was no longer a gift from God, but had been co-opted by the priestly class for their own financial and institutional benefit. And the people, rather than be able to rest and be together as families, they were ordered to give themselves over to one more day of exhausting travel and familial separation, exactly the opposite of God's intention in the first place. When I finished saying all this, Dana and Connor said nothing, but their faces betrayed a sense of relief, even of delight. I then said, in my view, what the two of you have chosen to do as a family on Sunday mornings is not only wise, it's obedient. It's honoring of God's loving desire for the five of you. You really mean that, Pastor Bob? Connor asked. Absolutely, I said. Now, both smiling and wiping some tears from my own eyes, I said, the love the two of you are putting into action for your marriage and your children is commendable beyond measure. You are living embodiments of the fourth commandment's original intent. You are doing what God wants everyone to do. Care for your marriage and your family by resting together. But what about worship on Sunday mornings? Asked Dana. You ask a good question, Dana, I responded. It's a question every worshiping congregation should ask together. We need to be attentive to the needs of all within the congregational family, including those such as you five who have such heavy demands on your lives the other 6 days of the week that you may need to consider Sunday as the day when you don't hike to the high holy place, but stay home together. The balance of the conversation with this dear duo mirrored many such conversations I've had over the years, including several in the immediate wake of the sermon series I proffered years earlier. While I share with the wider institutional church a high value placed on regular weekly worship as a congregation, I nonetheless find myself ever in need of the corrective blessing embedded in the fourth commandment. Wherever in each congregation there may be families of any shape or size who find themselves bereft of restful time together from Monday through Saturday, it may well be the church's responsibility to permit and even to urge those families to remember the Sabbath day, to receive the God-given blessing of resting together as a family. Absent the honoring of that commandment, the family of God may not only grow increasingly weary, we may grow apart from one another and from our loving God. There you are. Welcome. I'm going to pass the baton to the person who is right in the lane next to me. Moira Poppen Gargano, as you can see here, amongst any number of things that she does and is, serves as a caregiver with Comfort Keepers, and she graciously agreed to be one of 2 responders. And after you've had a few things that you share, I'm going to pass the baton along to Peter Christensen as a primary care provider, physician here in town. Welcome.
Well, first of all, I just came off of the 3rd shift, and then I went home, took a shower, and I saw on my schedule Sunday school, and I go, why am I supposed to be at Sunday school today? So anyway, I'm glad I came when I did, and I'm glad I thought about this beforehand. First of all, I think the role of grace is always essential in the church, and as we express it in the body of the church. But at the same time, when I think of Sabbath as rest, but the Sabbath is rest for God. And knowing, I worked with a lot of youth in churches and with families, and I knew they weren't resting together. You know, the kids were off doing their own thing on their phones or playing, video games, and the parents were doing separate things. So it wasn't exactly that they had a day of rest from. And this is where I'm going to go. They needed rest, but I still always I encourage that people in the parish that I was in, is that Sunday is not just a time for just yourselves even, but it's also you're a blessing to other people when you come to worship. So I did the opposite. I encouraged families to still come to church and find a way to rest. The short of that is that the other, I think the other presenting problem is it begs the question of the congregation, what makes worship a burden? Mm-hmm. That's the essential question. And because for me, I need to come to worship. That's where I find my rest. But what is it to families who say we need to have a day home to rest together? What are they actually saying about worship? They could be personalities of people who are more introverted and want more quiet worship, more contemplative. That's why I find when I'm tired, maybe going to the Catholic services is more meaningful, because I don't have to interact with the whole community. I don't have to have a role to play. And so I can completely rest when I go to a Catholic service. So I think there's something, even in last week's annual meeting when we talked about alternative worship, and there was a suggestion that it may not be alternative separate from worship. But then I think we need to think carefully about what is resting in worship, so that families don't have to say, we're going to stay home or go to church, in order to rest. They don't have to make that decision. Coming to church is restful. That's what I was wondering.
Thank you.
I have my own mic. Good morning. So I was going to share kind of a 2-part thing. First, the context for us when Emily and I and our kids. So the idea of Sabbath rest really got drilled home when we were in residency. I was in residency, but you do it together, of course. So the context of that is I was working 120 hours a week in the hospital. We were helping to plant a new church in Lansing. We had bought an old house that needed a lot of fixing up. And the 3rd year, we had our first child, Leaf, who you guys don't get to see too much. He's around a little bit. He was an extremely colicky, difficult child. So all of those things were going on in our lives at the same time. And we were enjoying it. I mean, it's a very rich time of life, but it was a lot. So in the context of that, the church plant, of course, the services were on Sunday morning, and we were planting that with a very close group of friends, people that we've known for many years. And for some reason, the only time our son would actually sleep for an extended period of time was Sunday morning. So we were caught. You really don't want to wake up that child. But then we weren't also participating in the church plant on Sunday morning. And so we started to stay home. Of course, I could use the excuse I was post-call, which was often actually true. But there was another one, which we were open with. It wasn't we were trying to hide this. The inner city neighborhood that we lived in Lansing, as we were home with our son, sitting outside, at least when it's warm, we realized that's when everybody in the neighborhood was also sitting outside on their porch, and we saw people that otherwise we never saw during the week, given all of our schedules and work schedules. So we'd walk around the neighborhood with him in the stroller and interact with all of these individuals that we were living close by, but otherwise would never interact with. It was a very rich time. We felt like, okay, we're really actually connecting with people in a deep way. So all of those things were happening. We realized Sabbath rest came to mean a whole new thing. It was very rich. To pivot from the family physician side of things, I'll share something a little outside of the relational side of things, which has been shared already, and that's, of course, a very deep, rich thing that has to do with Sabbath. But to bring in a little bit of the medicine, just to kind of get your brains thinking, and maybe a lot of you know this already, it's not, hopefully not any kind of a secret knowledge, but we spend a third of our time of our lives sleeping, resting, hopefully, if you get good sleep. So to think about that, we spend a third of our lives doing nothing, resting, and we have to in order to be fully human. And I think about that often. What does it mean to be fully human? Not just relationally, but physically, spiritually, whatever it may be. So God has designed our bodies to require that. So when you sleep at night and you do nothing from the world standpoint, a lot of things actually are happening. There are processes that while we sleep that only happen while we sleep. And if you don't, you will suffer the health consequences. There are brain restoration processes that only happen when you sleep. One of the theories as far as advancing cases of dementia is we as a society have sacrificed our good sleep, and we're seeing the repercussions of that now. So I find that very interesting. To be fully human, fully alive, you need to do nothing for a third of it, which is backwards from how a lot of our society kind of drives things. And so as I interact with patients, it's often what's bugging you, this, and a lot of it's because they're probably just doing too much and they're actually just not sleeping, resting physically. So the fact that we have to cease all activity in order to be healthy, I find very interesting, and that's how we're designed. You can't cheat that. You can't hack that, as we're always trying to do, right? So I think that is, just a very rich picture. And then there's, of course, lots of ways we do sabotage that, right? Caffeine, alcohol, drug use, whatever, your screens, whatever activities, there's all kinds of things that will take that away from us. We have control over those things. Even the medications that we sometimes take for sleep really aren't restoring sleep in a deep sense. So even as a physician, people say, I just want to sleep. I'm like, well, we got to unpack that. I can make you nap all night, and I can make you not be aware that but I'm not necessarily restoring the deeper processes that you really need for complete health.
Thank you to both of you. I'm glad you made it. I have a mic here, and the mic's going to circulate now with the hope that other comments and contributions are in order.
I appreciate all the things I've read in here. Really made me reflect on this. But somehow I have to ask the question. This is all about me. When do we have time to reflect about our relationship to God?
Thank you.
If we aren't going to worship, or we aren't taking time at home on Sunday, when do we have time to think about something other than ourselves? God. And teach our children about God. God who made us. And his importance in this world. And all of that. If we don't come to church. Or if we don't do it at home. That's my real concern.
Yeah. Your question prompts me to share the following, which is somewhat related to the account I've just read, but I just want to share it out loud. I am convinced that, and I'm speaking as an institutional person, I'm a clergy person within the organized institutional church. We within the institutional church oftentimes err in the direction of over-codifying certain things in Scripture beyond what their intent was. For example, with regard to worship on the Sabbath, such as is embedded in what I tried to share with the couple in their home. There is a part of me that believes that the Levitic error that we continue is to suggest that we worship once a week, don't we? And it's on Sundays, the Sabbath, right? As opposed to we are to worship 7 days a week. To your question, that we are to be a people who remember to engage our Lord and be engaged by our Lord every day when we rise and we're ready to get into bed and get the rest that we need. But what we have done, unfortunately, with the institutional church is so much codified the concept of worship that we have sequestered it to about 2.5 hours on Sunday mornings. Or for those who are really, really busy, 1 hour, or for those who are super busy, I'll just do it next week. As opposed to this morning, this noon, this evening, that we are to be worshipful throughout our lives. But the irony, from my perspective, is that some of what we have done with the institutionalizing of our religious traditions, including the fourth commandment, is to limit the concept of worship such that then all of a sudden we're wondering, when are we going to do it if we can't do it on Sunday morning? Well, we should be doing it 7 days a week. And there are more things that I could say about that, but I'm going to stop. But that's what precipitated by your helpful question. And I think your helpful question derives from the danger of what we as an institution have done to certain elements of what we are meant to be engaged in as spiritual children of God. Now I'll back off.
Bob, that's a good answer to Sibylla, but I want to build on what Sibylla asked and take it a step further. Because she was talking about, I mean, this seems very much focused on me, on us and our needs. She asked, what about God? I want to ask, what about we, the we part of life? Religion means to bind together. It's spirituality, practice, and community. Mm-hmm. And so when I come here, this expands the me and connects me with the we. Right. I mean, you are my people. We are together here as a circle of people that care about each other. And I wonder if the kind of guidance to this family sort of cuts them off, not only from God, but also from the we, from the supportive community that could be there to support their family if they would participate and be part of that communal religious life.
Other responses?
So that's very much our experience. I resonate deeply with this family and their needs. What we did in that period when we started walking our neighborhood on Sunday mornings with our kids is meet people and connect to a bigger we, right, that was outside of our church. We unfortunately had a pastor that we were planting this church with who had a very different response to us and said, you may not be a part of our church if you're not going to do Sunday morning with us, which was a little bit jarring for us, honestly, because we'd grown up in the church and we felt very much still dedicated to those people that we were planting with. And we told our pastor, hey, this is a different season for us. Like, we need this time to do things differently. But what happened when we started meeting our neighbors, we met a family from Bosnia with 2 kids who were teenagers, really amazing kids. They would come over all the time. Like, when we started building this relationship with them, we had dinner with them. They would come over at all hours of the day and hang out with us and start taking care of our kid because they knew how exhausted we were. And as we built this relationship, the daughter, who was probably 12 at the time, said, hey, there's this house church down the street. Do you want to go with us? And so we did this house church with them, and it got us thinking about a different way of doing church, right? Where church was restful. It was simple. When we moved back to Holland shortly after that, a couple years later, we were part of a house church here, and it was such a different experience of living that worshipful life together as families. We intentionally worshiped throughout the week together. Sunday mornings, did we do it Sunday mornings or afternoons? I can't remember when we met. Sunday afternoon. Like, we were all had little kids, right? So just sometimes Sunday mornings were not a good time. So we would just get together. Everyone would bring a part of worship. So yes, very simple. Like, our kids helped do communion. It was super simple, but it was also not stressful. If people walked in late, like, there were only a group of 15 of us maybe at the tops. So it was just a very different experience of what church and worship was all about. And for us, it was very healing and liberating.
And out of that house church grew Eighth Day Farm and 360, which are still going on today. So I think that speaks to the strength of what that house church was able to birth, and those things are still going on quite strong now.
Thank you, Jane. Oh, can I say something? Hi. Okay. My father was a minister, so he was a Baptist minister. So my first one Sunday just went off. Is it off?
No.
Okay, I won't touch it.
You're good.
Okay. Okay. So I went to college and I didn't go to church because, I'd been a minister's kid and who wants to go to church. And then I got out of church and I married a guy who was going to be a professor, and we were going to go to grad school over in England, but then I got pregnant, and then he said, well, if I'm going to be teaching ministers, I think I better be a minister first. That's when I think I threw some laundry. And I said, I swore I would never marry a minister. I did not want to be like my mother. So, yeah, we had our first child, and then we went 6 weeks later up to Traverse City, and he was a pastor there for 4 years. It was difficult for me. I had another baby. And then we went to Princeton, thank goodness, and he did the 4 years there as a grad student. And then he started being a professor, okay? So I have gone to church most of my life. But I've had doubts, and, is there really a God, blah, blah, blah. But church has always been there. But as I've gotten older, I've had a big question, and that is, who started church the way we do it now? And I've asked Jim, I've asked our pastors, and it's like, well, I don't know. But who started the whole thing where you come on Sunday, you sit in rows, you have a certain ritual, liturgy, then you sit for 20 minutes to 45 minutes and listen to somebody tell you stuff. And then you sing, and then you go out and you might shake some people's hands and talk to some friends, and then you go home. I found that's my big question. It's like, when did that start? And for me, we went to early worship, and so it was very, very different. It was like interactive. I love this kind of thing where I feel like I know you guys, and I love being with you. But when I sit in a seat and I'm looking at the back of your head, that doesn't feel like I'm really interacting with you, except when I say, peace be with you, or afterwards a little bit. So when did all that start? And my question is, is that really? I don't find it helpful anymore. I'm sorry. I think about a home church or, somewhere where it's not so formulated and formal. And see, but then there's a lot of other people who love that rest of having the liturgy and being able to worship. So it's just a different temperamental thing for me, a temperament thing. Sunday mornings when I was a pastor's wife, and also when I was a pastor's kid, were the most unrestful times of the week. I would be, frustrated with my kids. Come on, we got to get there. Daddy's, there. Or my mother would be doing that to me, and it was horrible. So that's my question. When did it all start? Does anybody know? Is that like when Paul, the apostle, was preaching in a room upstairs, and he preached so long that the guy fell out of the window?
So all of these things seem really good. The things that I think about church, I always have in my head the portion of scripture that said Jesus went to the temple as was his custom. And for me, coming to church and listening always kind of sets my head in a better way for the next week. So I really do, for that 20-minute or whatever, and the communal singing, that really does kind of get me back where I think I should be. What I often think about and worry about is our current, and I don't want to make throw out a bigger challenge than what we're ready for, but I think about our current socio-economic culture where so many people, in order to have food on their table, so to speak, and a place to live, work, with no choice in terms of, and that's different for me than healthcare, medical care, which we see as a different way. But there are so many people that are called upon to work on the Sabbath because that's the way things are, and they wouldn't have a roof or bread on their table without foregoing that, and that can really mess things up.
Other comments, questions?
Hi. Most of the conversation I hear in the wider world about Christianity, I think, I don't know what this is, but I'm sitting in here hearing just the mix of what everyone's saying, and I think, okay, yeah. These are the conversations that I want to have. I'm so glad that you have this topic. I find it ironic. Our own Carol Bechtel is the head of a D-Min program at Western Seminary right now, and I'm part of that. And I'm thinking about what my project is, and the irony is that I'm making a work project out of the subject of Sabbath. I'm very aware. Yeah, I just love all the different things that are being said here, and it's almost like the conversations that happen in my own head. Is it about God? Is it about us and our need for rest? Is it about community? Is it about my family? I think these are all, the more I read, the more I explore, these are all such active, alive questions. And kind of looking at our Jewish brothers and sisters and what Sabbath is in terms of not a belief, but an act and a doing and a being with people and a celebration. Maybe I just want to put a little plug in. Carol Bechtel wrote a really cool Bible study about Sabbath. It's like a multi-week thing, and I don't know if other people would be interested in doing that, but it really is. We're in the middle of it in my program right now, and I would love companionship and an exploration around that. It's very easy, just kind of reading each week. I've been doing my own 24-hour Sabbath practice since September, every Saturday at 6 until Sunday at 6. And I would love to have, it's very hard to do that by yourself. And I appreciate that there are other faith groups that do that commitment of time as a group. And so anyway, I'm just maybe wanting, I'm not saying I'm going to lead something, but maybe if there but if other people are interested in more exploring of this, I'm interested in that too. So thank you for bringing this into conversation.
You know, the women's circles did Carol's study together, and Carol came and introduced her study with us, which was wonderful. And she wrote extra materials that she also shared with us. It's been one of our best studies. We've absolutely loved it. We donated some of our extra copies to the church library. So I don't know if you will still find them there, but they used to be in the church library if you're interested, just FYI.
I brought my book that we used last year on Circle 1. And in the first place, that Carol Bechtel was even allowed to write a book for the Presbyterian Church. That's pretty great, you know. And if you asked me to write a book about the Sabbath and Sabbath practices, I'd be lucky to get a page full written. And here she has written 9 studies on it, and it really was a very good one. And in the end of the book, it has and she herself is practicing a whole routine of Sabbath practices, very much just to herself, with herself. And at the end of the book, and I had it right at the right place, and maybe I've lost it, but she says, maybe we shouldn't even have church committee meetings on Sunday. Now that's quite a different thought than to have a congregational meeting.
So I'm so glad I'm sitting next to this wonderful woman next to me, because one of my thoughts right away when I heard this was thinking about when my second child was born and going to our fabulous, wise, gentle pediatrician, Vern Boersma. And he's looking over the baby, and he's looking at tired me, and he said, you know, you don't have to go to church on Sunday. That the nursery's kind of filled with a lot of germs anyway. So he was giving me a medical reason not to have to go to church. So there's that. The thing I was thinking about, but when you're asking your question, I love that question. When did it happen? My sister and brother-in-law are Orthodox Jews, and we've worshipped with them. And the men were the ones, Jesus was there with all the men. The women were there, but remember when Paul said the women were to be silent in church, and all you studying people know this. The women are sort of housed all the way back, way up in the top. And of course, when I've worshipped with them, with my sister and brother-in-law, and I'm with the women, then the children, and it's actually quite lovely up there, but now we have microphones and stuff so you can actually hear what they're saying down there, even though the women don't get to say anything. But at that time, of course, the women were up there chattering away, and Paul was telling them to shut up because they were causing a disturbance. So that idea of getting together is very old and obviously goes back into the Jewish time, and the women and the children were back up there. I'll tell you, it was lovely. We sat up there, we were chatting, the children were sort of running around us, they were eating candy. The guys are down there talking about scripture. And I actually, when you talked about the separation, I kind of think the women probably kind of liked that chance where they got to go and be just with each other and with their kids, and the husbands were all down there, and they had their own fine time. But anyway, so I like the idea of looking back, but looking at Orthodox Jewish practices kind of gives me a little insight to where that all might have started.
I would point to a different referent for that. I would go to the Catholic Church, and at the moment of institutionalization into the Roman Empire, because then they needed the resources to build the monumental churches that they did that expressed their power within that structure. So how much of the Roman approach and viewpoint of the world is built into that service? And at the same time, you have a large population that are not readers. So you have the readers, the priestly class, explaining to everyone. And so you're in rows like in school, and that. It wasn't a community in that sense. It was a directed kind of thing from those who knew and those who couldn't read.
Well, I see this a little differently. I listened to your story, Bob, and I thought of our lives, and for 66 plus years, we have kept Sabbath loosely. At the same time, not feeling bad if we were in Rome and not trying to find a church in Rome to go to, because we had probably wandered through 5 or 6 in awe. And then I think about this couple, and 2 things in their life strike me as, well, they did have some options. One of them is they said, well, by the afternoon, the kids are off to soccer and whatever. Well, do they have to go to soccer camp? Do kids have to go to soccer camp? Then they mentioned the wife working, and they mentioned him being gone day and night practically because his job had been transformed. And there is more than one place to work in the world. And there's also the question of aspiration, monetary and whatever. And there's a sense in which Western civilization, particularly America, and we are the first country that pulled, this may not go down very well in this church, women out of the home and into a distant place to accomplish work for the benefit of making money to spend on things and processes and services that aren't basic human needs. And when you do that, you destroy the economic foundation of single employment, and we have the result of it. So it's easy to say from my point of view, well, you might have counseled, well, how about, I understand your issue, but you know, maybe 1 week in 3 or 4, it would be good to remind the children of worship. That's, you know, there's no reason that you have to come every week. You know, like I said, when we're in Rome, we don't look for a church, although we've enjoyed churches in Bangkok and Shanghai, Wenzhou, and God knows all the other places that we've visited. So if we're not here, you know one of us is sick, because we no longer are going to be out of town.
I just wanted to make a quick comment in regard to the study guide that Carol wrote and that Lois is holding there. In the very last chapter, one of the most significant things that came through to me regarding Sabbath was a quote that she has from Travis West, and he calls one of the most important things as we build community is that we build spiritual connections and relationships, and that we become spiritual companions one for the other. And for me, that is one of the most significant things of what it means to be part of a community such as this. And in fact, we've kind of reestablished different kind of relationships in the REST group, which is a group for caregivers and grievers. And we instead of having a person who is expert to give expert advice, we see ourselves as spiritual companions, one for the other, and each one supports each other. And I think that has been a wonderful way to work together. And the group is I think, has a special strength at the moment because of that.
I just want to allow I need to give you a little pushback on the make women do this. And partly it's because I think we have to step back and say, what do we as communities need? And I think we need places where children are nurtured and cared for. With extended families and families that love them. We need work situations where people can make a living and live decently and well and have rest. So it's not just up to the individual to go look for the job where it's up to us to make sure that as a society that there is a minimum wage that supports people to be able to live. I mean, to step back and think, how are we going to structure this society so people have time to worship God? And third, just as I think about myself stepping out with my children and almost didn't get my job because the provost at the time felt that a woman with children should be at home and not teaching. Women have gifts. This world needs those gifts. And my husband and I worked out ways that we could meet the needs of our children, we could meet the needs of one another, and we could make sure that our gifts were shared where they were needed. So just not to assume that it's the women who have to do one thing and the men who have to do one thing.
Let's see if we can get you in before she talks.
Just one thing that I wanted to say. We're not like world travelers. We've only been to like 7 different countries. But I know that when we have traveled, one of the things that we always hear is, boy, you Americans, you really love to work. And not last Christmas, but the Christmas before that, we happened to be in Germany for Christmas. And a couple that sat next to us was chatting with us, and I happened to speak German. And she was saying to me, I wonder if you could answer a question for me. She said, my daughter's gone to live in America, and she's working in America. And she says she can't come home for Christmas this year. And she says it's because she only gets 1 week of vacation. She works for a whole year, gets 1 week of vacation, works for 2 more years to get 2 weeks of vacation. She says, that's not true, is it? And I said, it's been true of a lot of the companies where I have worked. And I know when I grew up, my mother did not work. I always worked. But in the days when I grew up, CEOs were not making, 100 times more than the people in production. And what we see nowadays is that there are actually people who are working 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so I would agree with what the nice lady across has to say. We need to make it so that if you work 40 hours a week, you're earning enough money to cover everything that you need to cover. It's really a shame that in this country, which is a wealthy country, that people can't just have one job, that they must work so many jobs to get by. And then we seem to have gotten an attitude in this country of having a very negative attitude towards poor people. It's like, well, it's your own fault. So I just think we need to be a little bit more gracious. I don't have a problem with food stamps and contributing towards that. But when you have a company that pays people such a low wage that they qualify for food stamps, we're not subsidizing those people. We're subsidizing that corporation, which is not paying their people enough to earn a living wage. And I would say with Mr. Borchter, I know he owned his own company, and I'm sure he took very good care of the people who worked for him. And so I'm not talking about, a small businessman. I think our smaller businessmen tend to be far more caring about their employees.
Wow, so many stories have circulated in my head. I remember, talk about Germany. We had a German exchange student when my daughter was in high school. And I would come home sometimes from work in the RCA, where I worked too hard and too long. But I would come home and I'd grab the newspaper and I'd stand there thumbing through the newspaper, and the German exchange student would look at me and go, "Sit down." She's, "What are you doing?" "Sit down." She would repeatedly tell us, "You work too hard. You need to rest." And I often reflect on that, because she would also say, "Have a cup of tea. Sit down. Drink a cup of tea." I have tea now. I love tea. And yes, but learning to rest, it can be hard. Thank you, Bob. You have opened up many stories and have given us good thoughts. Thank you. Next week, you can read on page 13 today in the bulletin. Bob will be back talking about rediscovering our kin. We'll take a look at the Old Testament figure of Joseph. And the responders next week, Kathy Davilar Van Rees and Dan Griswold will be here to also respond. So we hope to see you next week as well. Thank you. Thank you.